All right, so you're ready to scale up your startup. That's exciting stuff. But you also want to make sure you keep that great company culture. The one you've worked so hard to build. It's more than just perks and fun, right? It's really the heart of your company. And you've sent over a ton of articles, research, even some notes, which is awesome. We're going to unpack it all today. Focusing on this, scaling a startup without losing company culture. Can you really grow super fast without losing what makes your company special? Well, that's our mission today. And the research is pretty clear right off the bat. Organizations that really get culture right while they're growing are much more likely to succeed. It's not just a nice extra, it really gives you an edge. So, expert speaker, what's the big deal about company culture when you're scaling? Why is it so important?
Well, think of it this way. Culture is like the operating system of your startup. When things get more complex, your values and how you do things, that keeps everyone working together. It's even more important as your team grows because it helps everyone feel connected and like they have a purpose, even when you can't all fit around the same table anymore.
Okay, but scaling up isn't always easy. The research talks about some serious roadblocks, like that cash flow crunch everyone's heard of. But it's not just that expenses go up. They found that when you hire a lot of people quickly, individual performance actually dips for like 3 to 6 months. You have all these new people who are figuring things out, and that can affect your money situation and team morale. Then there's communication breakdowns. It's not just missing meeting invites. As you get bigger, those quick chats that were so easy when you were smaller, those get lost, and that's a problem. This can lead to misunderstandings, people doing the same work twice, and employees feeling disconnected. And finally, let's talk about operational chaos. The research actually points out that a lot of startups focus on speed over process when they're small, which makes sense at first, but as you scale, that lack of clear procedures can really make things a mess. You get inconsistencies, mistakes, and the quality of work goes down. And let's be honest, that's not going to make anyone happy or motivated. So, expert speaker, how do these challenges actually hurt company culture? What are the real world consequences we should be looking out for?
Let's take that cash flow crunch, for example. You're the founder, you've got pressure, and suddenly those values you talked about, quality, taking time to do things right, those might go out the window just to make payroll. That erodes trust, and employees start wondering if those values were ever real. And when communication breaks down, it's more than just missed deadlines. It creates silos, people get resentful, and they start feeling like cogs in a machine instead of valued team members. And that lack of clear processes. The research found that it often makes things feel unfair. Why is Sarah working late fixing mistakes when John seems to be cruising? That creates negativity, and even the most dedicated employees can start to check out.
Okay, that's a pretty rough picture. But the research doesn't just leave us there. It gives us a bunch of strategies for keeping our company culture strong during this crazy growth phase. And the best part is, they're not just vague ideas, they're actionable steps you can actually take. First up, defining your culture. But this is more than just a mission statement that no one reads. The research suggests taking a good look back at those early days, the values that came up naturally. What really made your company work? What were those unwritten rules that everyone just understood? Write those down, make them clear, and use them as your guide as you scale. Next, the research really stresses how important robust onboarding is. This isn't just HR paperwork, it's about making new hires feel like part of the team right from the start. They need to understand not just what they're doing, but why it matters, why it connects to your company's mission and values. It's like giving them a cultural GPS so they don't get lost in all the changes. And speaking of getting lost, open communication is key. But it can't just be the CEO sending an email once a month. The research says leaders need to be visible, easy to talk to, and always reinforcing the company's values through their actions and decisions. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Now, I know you're thinking about the bottom line, but investing in employee development is a big part of maintaining culture during growth. Think training, mentorship, clear career paths. It shows your people that you care about their future, not just what they can do for you right now. And guess what? The research found that companies with strong development programs see more engagement and less turnover. That's good for culture and your profits. But it's not all serious business. Celebrating wins is also important. It doesn't have to be fancy. A shout out in a meeting, a small bonus, even just a sincere thank you can go a long way. It shows those values in action. It shows people that you see their contributions and you appreciate them. And here's something interesting the research pointed out. Don't abandon your traditions. Those quirky things you did when you were smaller, maybe it was a Friday demo day, a company-wide volunteer event, or even just how you celebrate birthdays. Those rituals, even if they seem silly, they're like cultural glue. They connect people to the company's history and to each other. But it's not just about holding on to the past. Scaling up means adapting, and your culture has to adapt too. That's where gathering feedback is really important. Regular surveys, one-on-ones, even anonymous suggestion boxes. The research suggests making lots of ways for people to share their thoughts and concerns. This helps you find potential problems early, and it makes sure your culture stays in tune with your growing team's needs. Now, you know hiring is always important for a startup, but the research says hiring for cultural fit becomes even more critical as you scale. Skills are important, obviously, but attitude, values, alignment, that's what determines if someone will really succeed in your unique environment. A bad cultural fit can be toxic, even for a team full of talented people. All right, so we've got the theory. Let's get practical. The research looks at some amazing real-world examples of companies that scaled up without losing their soul. And it goes beyond just naming names. It actually breaks down the specific strategies they used. First up, Netflix. Think about it. They went from mailing DVDs to becoming a global entertainment giant. That kind of change requires a lot of adaptability. And yet, they've held onto their core values. The research highlights their famous freedom and responsibility culture, giving employees a lot of autonomy but holding them accountable for results. It's about empowering people to innovate and take ownership, which is especially important when you're growing fast. Then you've got Airbnb. Remember their early days? Struggling for funding, facing tons of skepticism. Any of those challenges could have destroyed their culture, but they held on to their vision of creating unique travel experiences, and they built a culture of resilience. The research actually found that they encouraged employees to share their struggles and failures. They created a culture of learning and support. It reminds us that being vulnerable and transparent can be incredibly powerful, especially when things are tough. Lyft is another interesting example. They built their whole brand around the idea of community, supporting both drivers and riders. And the research shows that this focus on community isn't just marketing, it's part of their internal culture too. They have programs that encourage employees to connect with drivers, understand their challenges, and advocate for them. It's a reminder that strong culture goes beyond your office. It's about how you treat everyone in your ecosystem. And finally, let's talk about The Honest Company, founded by Jessica Alba. Now, the research points out that their success wasn't just about celebrity power, it was about building a company based on real values, safety and sustainability. They lived those values, from their product ingredients to their social impact initiatives. It's a powerful reminder that aligning your business with what you believe in can be a huge driver of success, and it can create a really passionate company culture. Expert speaker, looking at these success stories, what's the one big thing you think our listeners should remember as they go through their own scaling journey?
It's fascinating. All these companies have different stories, but they all understood that scaling isn't just about adding people and resources. It's about actively nurturing your culture, adapting it to the challenges of growth, and making sure it stays the driving force behind your success. It's like having a plant. You can't just repot it into a bigger container and expect it to thrive. You have to give it the right nutrients, the right support, make sure it gets enough sunlight. Culture's the same way.
I love that analogy. And speaking of nutrients and support, the research actually looks at some specific tools and tactics that can help you scale culture effectively. You know all about the communication challenges of a growing team. But forget that generic advice. The research highlights some really cool tech solutions. One that caught my eye is Donut. It's a Slack add-on that randomly pairs employees for virtual coffee chats. But here's the cool part. It's not just random chit-chat. Donut actually gives you conversation prompts, icebreakers, even shared interests to help spark those connections. It's like engineered serendipity, which is brilliant. When you think about how remote work can make those spontaneous moments disappear, there are other options too, like Hallway, which recreates those chance encounters, with virtual hallways where employees can bump into each other, or Tandem, which focuses on real-time communication. With things like virtual desks and instant audio and video calls, each tool has its own style. So it's about finding what fits your company's vibe.
What's interesting here is how these tools use technology to solve a human problem. As teams grow, it's easy to lose that sense of connection. These tools help bridge that gap. They encourage those informal interactions that are so important for healthy culture.
Exactly. And it's not just about connecting with colleagues, it's about staying connected to the company's mission and values. The research suggests setting up special channels where employees can share articles, inspiring quotes, even funny memes that reflect the company culture. Imagine a Slack channel where someone shares a customer testimonial. That perfectly shows your values. It's like a constant reminder of what you stand for. And the fact that it's coming from peers makes it even more powerful.
It's about giving employees the power to be culture champions.
Yeah.
They're not just getting messages from the top down. They're actively shaping the story.
Now, let's be real for a second. As you scale, those startup systems you put together might start to fall apart under the pressure of growth. The research emphasizes how important it is to have robust HR systems, not just for payroll and paperwork, but for actually managing and nurturing your culture. Think about HR software like Bamboo HR or Namely. They can automate all those boring admin tasks, which frees up your HR team to focus on more strategic stuff like onboarding, training, and performance management.
Efficiency is key here. When you're scaling up, you don't want to be stuck doing things manually. Streamlining those tasks gives you more time and resources to actually focus on building and keeping a strong culture.
Absolutely. It's about working smarter, not harder. And speaking of working smarter, let's talk about feedback and engagement. Remember all those surveys you used to send out? Well, the research suggests ditching those long annual ones and switching to more frequent pulse surveys. Short, targeted questions that give you a real-time snapshot of how employees feel. Some platforms even offer mood trackers, where employees can quickly share how they're feeling each day. It's like having a cultural barometer so you can see storms coming.
It's about keeping your finger on the pulse of the organization. What are people excited about? What are they struggling with? This real-time data lets you make changes quickly and keep your culture aligned with your growing team's needs.
Totally. But remember, feedback is a two-way street. It's not just about collecting data, it's about doing something with it. Show your employees that you value their input and that you're committed to creating a workplace where they feel heard and respected.
Okay, let's talk about one of my favorite topics, employee development. The research really emphasizes that as you scale, development programs become even more critical for keeping a strong culture. Think about it. As the company grows, so do the opportunities for your people. But you need to provide the support and guidance to help them navigate those opportunities.
What's fascinating is that investing in employee development is a win-win. It helps the individual by growing their skills and advancing their career. But it also strengthens the company culture by creating a sense of loyalty, engagement, and shared growth. Employees are more likely to stay if they feel like they're learning and progressing. I always say that the best companies are the ones that invest in their people. And it's not just about technical training. It's about helping them develop their leadership skills, their communication abilities, their problem-solving skills, all those things that make them valuable contributors to your company's success. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where do I even start? How do I actually put these tools and strategies into practice?
That's a great question. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when you're already juggling a million things. The research suggests starting with a simple question. What are the top 3 cultural challenges you're facing right now? Is it communication breakdowns? A lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities? Difficulty maintaining a sense of community? Once you've identified those challenges, you can start exploring specific tools and strategies that address them.
You're so right. It's about finding the right tools for your specific needs and budget. And remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Start with 1 or 2 things, see what works, and then build from there. Okay, we've covered a lot here, from communication tools to employee development. But there's one more important thing we need to talk about: measuring how effective your efforts are. How do you know if all this hard work is paying off? How do you measure the health of your company culture? And I'm not just talking about those generic satisfaction surveys, but real, tangible metrics that tell you what's working and what's not.
That's where the research gets really interesting. It goes beyond the usual feel-good metrics and dives into some hard-hitting data points that can give you real insights. One of the most interesting metrics is time to productivity. How long does it take for new hires to get up to speed and start making a real impact? This can be a really good indicator of how effective your onboarding process is and how well you're integrating people into your culture. Turnover and retention rates are also important if a lot of people are leaving, especially within the first year. That could be a red flag. It might mean that your culture isn't what they expected or that they don't feel supported and valued.
Those are definitely warning signs. And don't forget about engagement and satisfaction. But we're not just talking about those yearly surveys. The research suggests doing regular pulse checks, maybe even adding mood trackers into your communication tools. This gives you a real-time sense of how people are feeling. And you can address any problems before they get out of hand.
It's about creating a culture of continuous feedback, where people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas openly and honestly. And it's not just about collecting the data, it's about acting on it. Use the insights you gather to make changes, to course correct, and to make sure your culture stays a strength as your company scales.
You're absolutely right. It's about constantly iterating, experimenting, and refining. Culture isn't static. It needs to evolve as your company grows. It's like taking care of a garden. You're always pruning, weeding, and fertilizing to help it grow and thrive. We've discussed a lot of helpful strategies and tools today, but before we wrap up part two of this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question from the research, something to think about as you continue scaling up. Ready for it, expert speaker?
Bring it on. I always like a good challenge.
All right, here it is. We've talked a lot about defining company culture, but the research goes deeper and asks, what does a healthy company culture really look like to you? And how do you measure that health? It's not just about perks and fun things. It's about creating an environment where people thrive, both professionally and personally.
That's such an important question. It's not just about having a culture. It's about having one that's vibrant, supportive,
Yeah.
and aligned with your company's values and goals.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work. And that's something worth striving for.
At every stage of your startup journey, we'll dive deeper into this question and explore some practical ways to measure cultural health. In the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
a plant. You can't just like,
Yeah, I think you're
but expect it to do well. You got to give it the right food, the right support, make sure it gets enough sun. It's the same with culture. I love that. And speaking of nutrients and support, the research digs into some really specific tools and tactics that can really help you scale culture. I mean, you know all about the communication challenges of a growing team. Forget all the usual advice. The research highlights some seriously cool tech solutions. One that I thought was interesting is called Donut. Like, ooh, a Slack add-on that randomly pairs employees for virtual coffee chats. But, and this is the cool part, it's not just random chit-chat. Donut gives you conversation prompts, icebreakers even shared interest to help get those conversations going. It's like engineered serendipity, right? Which is so smart when you think about how remote work can make those spontaneous moments disappear. There are other options out there too, like Hallway. It basically recreates those chance encounters with virtual hallways where employees can bump into each other, or Tandem, which focuses on real-time communication with things like virtual desks and instant audio and video calls. Each tool has its own, its own flavor. So it's about finding what works for your company.
I think what's fascinating here is that you're using technology to solve a human problem. As teams get bigger, you lose that sense of camaraderie,
Yeah.
that connection. And these tools help bridge that gap. They encourage those informal interactions that are so important for a healthy culture.
Right. And it's not just about connecting with your coworkers. It's also about staying connected to your company's mission and values. The research suggests setting up dedicated channels for sharing resources where people can share articles, inspiring quotes, or even just funny memes that reflect your company's culture. Like imagine a Slack channel where someone shares a customer testimonial. That perfectly embodies your values. It's a constant reminder of what you stand for. And it means even more coming from your peers.
It's about empowering employees to be culture champions, really. It's not just top-down messaging. They're actively contributing to the story.
Exactly. Okay, let's get real for a minute. As you scale, those early systems you put in place might start to break down under the weight of all the growth. And the research really emphasizes the need for robust HR systems, not just for payroll and paperwork, but for actually managing and taking care of your culture. Think about HR software like Bamboo HR, or namely. They can automate all those tedious tasks, so your HR team can focus on more, strategic things like onboarding, training, and performance management.
Efficiency is so important here. When you're scaling, you don't want to be bogged down by all those manual processes. Streamlining frees up your time and resources so you can really focus on building a strong culture.
Yeah. It's all about working smarter, not harder. Speaking of working smarter, let's talk about feedback and engagement. Remember all those surveys, right? The ones you used to send out? Well, the research suggests ditching those long, yearly ones and going for more frequent, shorter surveys that give you real-time insight into how employees are feeling. Some platforms even have mood trackers where people can quickly share how they're doing each day. It's like a cultural barometer. You can spot problems before they get too big.
Yeah, it's about staying in tune with the organization. What are people excited about? What are they struggling with? This real-time data allows you to, adjust quickly and keep your culture aligned with your team's needs.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that feedback goes both ways. It's not just about collecting data. It's about actually doing something with it. Show your employees that you value what they have to say and that you're creating a place where they feel heard and respected. Okay, let's move on to one of my favorite topics, employee development. As you scale, the research really highlights how important development programs are for keeping that strong culture. As your company grows, so do the opportunities for your people, but you have to provide the support and guidance to help them navigate those opportunities.
I think it's really interesting that investing in employee development is beneficial for everyone. It helps employees by,
Yeah.
helping them learn new skills and advance their careers. But it also strengthens company culture by creating this sense of loyalty and engagement and shared growth. Employees are more likely to stay with you if they feel like they're learning and moving forward.
I always say, the best companies are the ones that invest in their people. And it's not just about technical training, it's about helping them develop their leadership skills, their communication skills, their problem-solving abilities, all those things that make them valuable to your company. So you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where do I even begin? How do I actually use all these tools and strategies?
Well, it's a good question. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when you're already so busy. But the research suggests starting with something simple. Ask yourself, what are the three biggest cultural challenges you're facing right now? Is it communication breakdowns? Is it unclear roles and responsibilities? Is it hard to maintain a sense of community? Once you've identified those challenges, you can start looking for tools and strategies that specifically address those things.
That's so true. It's about finding the right tools for your needs and budget. And you don't have to do everything at once. Start with one or two things, see how they work, and build from there. So,
Yeah.
we've talked about a lot, from communication tools to employee development, but there's one more crucial piece. We need to talk about measuring the effectiveness of your efforts. How do you know if it's all working? How do you know if your company culture is healthy? And I don't just mean those general satisfaction surveys. I mean real metrics that tell you what's working and what's not.
That's where the research gets really cool. It goes beyond just the usual feel-good metrics and looks at data points that can give you some real insight. One of the most interesting metrics is time to productivity. How long does it take for new hires to get up to speed and start making an impact? That can tell you a lot about how good your onboarding process is and how well you're integrating people into the culture. Turnover and retention rates are important too, if a lot of people are leaving, especially early on. That could be a sign that something's not right. Maybe the culture isn't what they expected, or maybe they don't feel supported.
Yeah, those are definitely red flags. And don't forget about engagement and satisfaction, but we're not just talking about those once-a-year surveys. The research suggests more regular check-ins. You could even use mood trackers in your communication tools. This gives you a real-time sense of how everyone's feeling and lets you address any issues before they blow up.
Yeah, it's about creating a culture where people feel comfortable sharing their feedback openly and honestly. And it's not just about collecting that feedback. It's about using it to make things better.
Mm.
Make adjustments, course correct, and make sure your culture stays strong as you grow.
You're right. It's about constantly iterating and experimenting. Culture isn't static. It has to change and adapt as your company grows. Like a garden, right? You're always pruning, weeding, fertilizing to help it grow and thrive. So we've talked about a lot of really insightful stuff today. But before we finish up part 2 of this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question from the research, something to think about as you keep scaling. Ready for it?
Hit me with it.
Okay, here it is. We've talked a lot about defining company culture, but the research asks, what does a healthy culture actually look like, and how do you measure that? It's not just about, perks and ping pong tables. It's about creating an environment where people can thrive, both at work and in their personal lives.
That's a really important question. It's
Yeah.
not just about having a culture. It's about having one that's vibrant and supportive. And that really reflects your values and goals.
Absolutely. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued and respected and empowered to do their best. And that's what we should all be aiming for, no matter what stage our company is at. We'll explore this question more and look at some ways to actually measure cultural health in the last part of our deep dive. So stay tuned.
Yeah, welcome back. So we're wrapping up our deep dive on scaling up without losing that awesome company culture. And we left off with a big question. What does a healthy company culture actually look like? Not just the superficial stuff, but the real signs that things are going well.
Yeah, it's a question that I think keeps a lot of leaders up at night, especially when they're growing really fast.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer, right? No magic checklist. But the research does give us some interesting ways to measure how things are going
Yeah.
and make sure your culture is strong. So forget those generic employee satisfaction surveys. The research suggests getting a lot more specific about what you're actually measuring. One thing that I found really interesting is this idea of cultural metrics.
Yeah, this is where things get really cool. It's about going beyond vague ideas about culture and figuring out the specific behaviors and values that are really important for your company. And then you track how you're actually living up to those things.
So, like, let's say collaboration is a core value for you. You wouldn't just ask, do you feel like people collaborate well?
Hmm.
You'd actually measure it somehow.
Exactly. You could track how often teams work together on projects, how easily information flows between departments, or even how many cross-functional projects get started. You could use tools like Asana or Jira, for example, to track how often teams share tasks and communicate. The important thing is to find metrics that really reflect the behaviors you want to see.
I love that. It takes the guesswork out of it
Yeah.
and gives you actual data to track your progress. Now, another thing the research talked about is how important informal feedback is. It's not just about formal surveys or performance reviews. It's about creating a culture where people feel comfortable, sharing their thoughts and ideas openly, even if it's just a casual conversation.
Yeah, like those conversations that happen in the hallway
Yeah.
or at the coffee machine. Those little moments can give you a lot of insight into how people really feel about the company culture.
Right. And it's not just about what they say, it's also about what you observe. Are people smiling? Do they seem engaged in their work? Are there cliques forming? All those little things can tell you a lot.
As we were looking at the research, something that really struck me is that culture isn't just an internal thing. It's also about how you interact with the outside world, your customers, your partners, even your competitors. Oh, that's so important. Your culture should be reflected in everything you do, not just how you treat each other inside the company. It's about the values you show to the world, the way you do business, and the impact you have.
It makes me think of companies like Patagonia with their focus on the environment, or Ben & Jerry's with their social justice mission. They're not just selling products, they're really living their values.
Right, and that authenticity is what makes a strong culture. It's not just about slogans. It's about actually living up to your values.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here are a few key things to remember. First, culture isn't something you set up and forget about. It needs constant attention. You have to adapt and be willing to change as your company grows.
Exactly. It's like a garden, right? You got to keep tending to it.
Second, don't be afraid to try new things. There's no one right way to do culture. Experiment with different tools and strategies. See what works for you.
The research actually talks about this. Having a test and learn mindset. Try something, see what happens, and adjust.
And finally, remember that building a strong culture takes time.
It does.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes effort from everyone in the company.
But it's so worth it. A strong culture is one of the most valuable things you can have.
It really is.
It drives engagement. It helps people be more innovative. And it creates a sense of purpose that can really fuel your success.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, you got this. Scaling up is tough, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Keep that culture strong. And we'll see you on the next deep dive.